Smiles, everyone, smiles! And welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. I had the great fortune of visiting the Pacific Northwest this past weekend. It's a part of the country we hear a lot about because it's gone to hell. And that is true, but we have to talk about mutual exclusivities when we talk about that part of the world, because although cities like Portland and Seattle, they are really just floating down the sewer. It's pretty. Parts of those cities absolutely disgusting. They have let so much get out of hand. You know, the two H's, homicide and homelessness. Whoops. So it makes parts of the cities very unlivable. But what happens is you still have really good people who are held hostage by a majority of idiotic voters. And the good people who happen to be in the voting minority are just starving for rationality and goodness. And I had the great fortune of being with Guy Benson and Kat Timpf on Friday night for the Washington Policy Center dinner. And that was really interesting because I lived in Seattle for several years, did talk radio at an FM talk station in Seattle, and got to talk about a lot of these issues and learn about these things when I was living there. And what always struck me is most people outside of Seattle are smart and normal and cool, and they love the outdoors. And I dub them the original conservationists because they are. You know, they're people who grew up hunting and fishing. They love the environment, but they hate climate change politics because this just climate orthodoxy breeds really, really bad policy. And that's what this group is pushing back against. So we got to hear some phenomenal speakers. And Kat and Guy and I were on stage talking about, you know, our lives as broadcasters and friends and, you know, what inspires us. So we hang out with. Kat asked each of us who would we be chained to for the day at Fox. She said Brett Baer. I believe Guy Benson said Dana Perino, and I said Larry Kudlow because Larry would not mind if I wanted to take a nap. He would be non-judgmental, and he's rich, so he would have a great couch and a very, very comfy bed, and he wouldn't mind if I caught a few Z's while he was throwing down flames. But we also went to Coeur d'Alene, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Pardon me. Oh, God. It's right next door to Washington. It's very close to Spokane. And what I didn't realize growing up in Portland is Spokane and Coeur d'Alene have this huge rivalry. So we were telling people in Coeur d'Alene that we had just left Spokane, and they're like, "Oh, you made it out of that socialist cesspool. That's a hellhole. That place smells like garbage," which is not necessarily true. Spokane was lovely, but and you go back to Spokane, you're like, "Oh, we're just in Coeur d'Alene." Like, "Oh, you escaped with your lives. That place is awful. Just bullets whizzing everywhere." I don't know if any of that is true, but they have a natural. It's like dogs and cats, natural hatred and distrust of each other, which made it even more fun because you kind of, you know, poke the bear and stoke the flames of animosity by comparing the two cities directly. But it was really fun to be in both places. So in Coeur d'Alene, I went with Kat for her show. She is supporting her book. And, you know, the thesis is obviously you can't joke about that. There are so many things that are supposed to be sacred that you can't make fun of in society. But we got to talk to a group of people in Spokane and Coeur d'Alene and Portland who are very eager to make fun of everything, but they are told that they can't. So it was a very receptive crowd when we were talking certainly about Kat's poo bag, which is chapter 5 of her book, which you should read immediately. But then what really struck me about the weekend was going to Portland. And this is a place I'm very familiar with. Jean, who works on Gutfeld, and Kat's tour manager and best friend, Keith, the four of us, we all, you know, we flew into Portland. My brother picked us up. We went to Burgerville, straight to my mom's, got a beautiful nature walk along the Willamette River and through George Rogers Park, and they got to see trees and birds, and it was very, very uplifting. And you see why people live in the Pacific Northwest. Like anytime you're in any one of these places, whether it's Coeur d'Alene, Spokane, Seattle, Portland, the outskirts of Portland, you see why people live there because the air is very clean. It's stunningly beautiful. And, you know, that's why these places used to be so wonderful and livable. And you also understand why people don't want to leave and people don't want to cede this paradise to horrible politicians who've run the cities into the ground. So what really struck me about being in Portland is so many people told Kat, don't go there. It's dangerous. There's homeless people. There's piles of feces and needles in the street. And you're going to get HIV and you're probably going to get bit by a rabid hobo. None of those things happened. We did have a ringworm scare, but we found out that was a false flag. I'll let Kat tell you about that at some other date and time. But what struck me is there are a lot of people who are on the more conservative side encouraging people not to go to places like this. And what I realize is, man, they need it more than ever. Like, they need the conversation. They need the outlet. They need to be able to make fun of things. They need to hear people making fun of themselves. They need balance. And it is so imbalanced, and people are so self-serious when they ascribe to those politics in places like Portland and Seattle that Kat said that she had not had a reception like that from any other city. And they were so appreciative that she was there. And I was very happy to be on stage with her because the show goes like this. If you have the chance to see Kat's show, absolutely, buy her book and read it. And then the show will be even more satisfying and engaging for you. But Gene from Gutfeld, he does 10 minutes. And then Kat, talks about her book and her life. And there's a PowerPoint presentation that really takes you through her personal and professional life. And it's very, very funny. And then I was on stage with her, asking her questions about the book. We're joking about ourselves and our friendship and our travels and, how we got to be friends after a bump on the road for the first time. And the audience was so receptive to all of it. And there were a lot of Fox fans there. And of course, they wanted Greg, Gutfeld, and Tyrus to go and visit Portland. And I would encourage people to do the same. It's almost worth going on a tour of places that have, you're talking about forgotten people. And the left has totally given up on them because they feel like they're never going to get their votes. And so it really is tyranny of the majority in these places. But the majority has so much power and influence that they are able to railroad these horrible policies and see a proliferation of crime, high taxes, and homelessness, while the rest of the people there are suffering, but they don't want to stand for it anymore. So the thing I will say is don't forget about people in places like Oakland and Portland and Seattle and San Francisco and even Minneapolis and Baltimore and other places where, the local government has broken down. The federal government, they don't care. They have written these places off. But there is an entire group of independents, Republicans, libertarians who need to coalesce. They need to find a way to work together to make government smaller and less intrusive so they can get that quality of life back. So they don't have these ridiculous regulations and the high gas prices they have in Washington state. So, they can think for themselves, raise their family, send their kids to school without being propagandized by these god-awful teachers unions and the politicians that they have bought and sold for, just like they have in New York and LA and every other part of the country, where you see bad grades and bad decisions and parents demonized and kept out of the classroom. These are the kind of people who were in the audience, and they were very eager. And I have to say, it gets really depressing when you report on the news thinking that we're going to be given this very limited set of choices for our presidential election. And you read about the crime stats in these places, and it feels like these cities have gotten past the point of no return. But you realize there are so many people there eager to fight for it and eager to bring it back, and they deserve their Lazarus moment. So my hat is off to Kat, who went into Portland triumphantly, and, she was not scared. She had a phenomenal time, and the audience showed that with so much respect and laughter. So there are good things to come. There certainly are bright spots in the country, and we have to acknowledge the light as well as reporting on the darkness. I love you, Portland. This has been Kennedy Saves the World. I'm Kennedy. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app. Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.